Sports fans rejoiced at the return of live games. First Major League Baseball, then basketball, and this weekend, hockey. Finally, sports journalists have some action to cover. But with more athletes testing positive for COVID, it's worth asking whether the sports media may have dropped the ball.
That's drilled to deep left, and that's
baseball. Restoring some much-needed normalcy to this crazy summer. That's the idea, anyway. But now, more than a dozen Miami Marlins have tested positive for COVID, causing alarm in other ball clubs.
I'm scared. I really am. My level of concern went from about an 8 to a 12.
So why play at all? In part because the sports media pleaded for the return of pro sports, a drumbeat that began in March.
Look, there's a lot of serious things going on. But we need entertainment. We need sports. We need something to root for.
You might expect that argument from a team owner, but that sentiment was widely echoed in the press.
The sport of Major League Baseball is the one sport in the United States of America that cannot, I repeat, cannot afford a cancellation of its season.
Even newspapers that have extensively covered the deadly pandemic ran headlines like, "America needs baseball more than ever." But maybe sports journalists would have been better served with this perspective.
We want sports. We don't need sports. And if I have to prove my credentials as a guy who's interested in sports, then people haven't been paying attention.
Game over. Callie, I know you are not a huge sports fan, but you do have a pretty deep background when it comes to medical coverage. Do you have any pointers for sports journalists who all of a sudden find that their beat has this totally unfamiliar and incredibly important new component to it?
Yeah, I think they should put it first. And I think that they should be listening very carefully to what the scientists have to say about protecting themselves, because there's nowhere to go on this story except in and around this virus, because they're trying to, all the methodologies set up to play the game is really within the context of trying to make sure those players don't get sick. And if that's your story, you better make sure you're not getting sick. I think the stories that have captivated me so far are the players that have said, you know what, no, I'm not playing because I don't want to take the risk of harming my family or my community. That's pretty intense, given that this is a lot about money.
I think it's a lot about money, too. I don't blame the media early on, sports media, news media, for saying that baseball should play. I think most of those calls were made when we had quote unquote, flattened the curve. I think now you're seeing just as many, if not more, sports media people saying that we should cancel the Major League Baseball season. We saw what happened with the Marlins earlier this week, with all those players and other personnel contracting coronavirus or testing positive. I think there's a better than even chance that the Major League Baseball season will still be canceled because of that. And I would be surprised if eventually NFL does the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Mike completely on that. I think that a lot of the rah-rah, let's open up again, came in April and May, when it looked like there was reason to think that we could do this and it would be okay. And it became kind of like a runaway train. You get into early July, and all the signs were there that baseball certainly should not move ahead, but it was almost too late to stop. And I think the media have been more responsible recently, but it just seems like it's too late to stop it at this point. But like Mike, I think that baseball is going to shut down any day now.
Well, you've got to remember, so much of the early coverage was about these contract negotiations, and then it becomes this irresistible story of billionaires versus billionaires and these two powerful groups butting heads, and that has a propulsion of its own as a kind of coverage. What happened to the Marlins this past week was utterly predictable. You put a bunch of guys in a hotel and tell them to stay in the hotel, and someone's not going to stay in the hotel. So it seems inevitable that something like this was going to happen. I miss sports, too. The fact that Little League is happening right now in my town is the best thing about my whole summer. So I understand the feeling, but I do think, like with a lot of things, we're going to be talking about a pullback.
And it is worth mentioning, I should have said this at the beginning, but better late than never. There were, as I think Mike and Dan, you guys mentioned, there were some skeptical voices. We kind of picked out the most egregious offenders for that, but there was a lot of cheerleading too.